Have you ever noticed that millionaires seem to live in a completely different financial reality than everyone else? Not just a bigger version of your reality, an actually different one, where money stops being something you chase and starts being something that works for you while you sleep. Most people assume this shift is gradual, that $1 million is just 10 times better than $100,000, that the rules are the same, just with more zeros. But that is not how money actually works at scale. There are specific thresholds where the rules of the game completely change, and $1 million invested, not earned, not in net worth, but actually invested and working for you, represents the single most important threshold most people will ever cross. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what changes when you get there, and I guarantee some of it is going to surprise you.
Here's the mental model most people have about building wealth. They imagine it's a straight line. $200,000 is twice as good as $100,000. $1 million is simply 10 times better than $100,000. Progress is steady, predictable, proportional. But that's not how money actually works at scale. Wealth building is exponential, not linear. And there are specific inflection points, specific thresholds, where the math, the psychology, and the actual opportunities available to you completely transform. $1 million invested is the biggest inflection point most ordinary people will ever reach. Before it, you are accumulating. After it, you are compounding. And those are fundamentally different games.
My name is Jude, and I've spent a lot of time studying wealth building patterns, watching people cross financial milestones, and analysing what actually changes when your investment portfolio hits certain numbers. If you want to understand the real mechanics of wealth, not the motivational poster version, the actual math, subscribe and hit the thumbs up if this ends up being useful. Let's get into it.
Let me show you exactly what I mean, with some numbers that will probably shock you. When you have £10,000 invested, earning a 7% annual return, that generates about £700 per year in passive income. Nice, but not life-changing. When you have £50,000 invested, you're looking at around £3,500 annually. Helpful, but you're still completely dependent on your job for survival. But here's where the math becomes absolutely unfair in your favour. £1 million at that same 7% return generates £70,000 per year without you lifting a finger. £70,000. That's more than the median American household earns at a full-time job, and it requires 0 hours of your time, 0 commute, 0 dealing with difficult bosses or workplace politics. Think about that for a moment. The money is working harder than most people do. The average American household spends about $67,000 per year according to recent data. So with $1 million invested at 7%, your money isn't just contributing to your lifestyle, it's potentially funding your entire lifestyle. Your investments become your employee, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, generating income while you sleep, while you travel, while you're at your kid's soccer game, while you pursue hobbies. This is the first wealth threshold where capital starts outperforming labor for most people. And once you cross this line, everything about your relationship with money fundamentally changes. You stop being a saver and you become something completely different, a capital owner. Saver and capital owner might sound like similar concepts, but they are completely different psychological and practical realities. When you're a saver, you're focused on accumulation. Every dollar matters because you're building towards something. Your financial strategy is all offense, constantly looking for ways to earn more, save more, reach the next milestone. But when you become a capital owner with significant invested assets, your entire mindset shifts to preservation and optimization. You're no longer trying to get rich, you're trying to stay rich and grow intelligently. That requires a completely different set of skills, strategies, and psychological frameworks. You've gone from playing offense to also playing defense, and understanding which mode you're in at any given moment becomes one of the most important financial skills you can develop. The math alone is enough to completely change your perspective on risk. When you have $20,000 invested, a 10% market drop costs you $2,000. That stings, but it's recoverable. You move on. When you have $1 million invested, that same 10% drop costs you $100,000. $100,000. Suddenly, market volatility isn't just numbers on a screen, it's real money that could fund multiple years of your living expenses, gone in a week. Daily portfolio fluctuations start exceeding most people's monthly salaries. You could check your account on a Tuesday afternoon and see it down $30,000 from Monday, not because you did anything wrong, just because the market moved. This creates a completely new type of financial anxiety that you simply cannot understand until you experience it firsthand.
But here's the fascinating flip side that most people don't understand until they experience it themselves. Once you have significant capital invested, market downturns stop feeling like disasters and start feeling like opportunities. When you have $1 million generating income, you have the financial cushion to weather temporary storms. More importantly, you have the capital to take advantage of situations that require money upfront. You can buy more assets at discounted prices during crashes. You have resources to invest in opportunities that require substantial capital. You can take calculated risks that could multiply your wealth because you already have enough to maintain your lifestyle regardless. This is where the wealthy really separate themselves from everyone else. They aren't hiding from market downturns, they're shopping during them.
Your relationship with work changes completely once you cross the $1 million threshold. And I'm not talking about immediately quitting your job, though some people do choose that path. I'm talking about working from a position of strength rather than desperation. When your investments can theoretically cover your basic living expenses, every career decision becomes a choice rather than a necessity. You can afford to walk away from toxic work environments. You can negotiate harder for better compensation because you're not desperate for the paycheck. You can take calculated risks, like starting a business or switching careers, because you have a financial foundation that won't collapse if things don't work out immediately. That negotiating position changes everything. When you don't need the job, you become more valuable to the employer. The desperation is gone, and people can feel that.
Maybe there's a job that pays less but offers better growth potential or aligns more with your values. When you have significant invested capital, you can afford to take that risk. Maybe you've always wanted to start a business, but were terrified of losing steady income. Having $1 million invested doesn't eliminate risk, but it provides a safety net that makes bold moves survivable. And here's what's interesting. This confidence tends to produce better outcomes. People who aren't desperate make better decisions. They negotiate from positions of strength. They take on projects that actually align with their skills and interests, rather than just taking whatever pays the bills. The worst-case scenario for most entrepreneurial ventures, when you have $1 million working for you, isn't poverty. It's returning to your previous lifestyle while your investments continue generating income.
Perhaps the most unexpected change is how you think about time itself. When you're building towards that first million, every hour you don't spend earning or saving feels wasteful. You're constantly calculating the opportunity cost of leisure. But once your capital is generating substantial income, you realize your time has become more valuable than your immediate earning potential. This is when people start making choices that look strange to outsiders. They might work fewer hours or choose work that's more personally fulfilling, even if it pays less. They take longer vacations without worrying about lost income. They spend more time with family or pursue hobbies that don't generate revenue but provide genuine satisfaction. From the outside, this can look financially irresponsible, but that's exactly the point. When your needs are covered, optimization shifts from maximizing money to maximizing life.
The $1 million threshold unlocks access to completely different types of investment opportunities. When you have substantial capital, minimum investment requirements that would have been impossible suddenly become accessible. Private equity funds, real estate syndications, business acquisition opportunities, and other high-barrier investments all become options. Many real estate investment funds and private vehicles require minimum investments of $50,000 to $100,000 per position. When you only have $20,000 total invested, these minimums are completely out of reach. But when you're working with $1 million portfolio, you can allocate 5 or 10% to these higher yield opportunities without concentrating your risk. These aren't just abstract strategies for the ultra-wealthy, they're real opportunities that become accessible once you have $1 million foundation, and they can dramatically accelerate your wealth building beyond what most people think is possible.
Banks and financial institutions treat you fundamentally differently when you have substantial assets. Getting approved for investment property loans becomes easier when you can show significant liquid investments as collateral. Business acquisition loans, which often require substantial down payments and proven capital reserves, suddenly become viable options. Access to cheap capital is one of the biggest and least discussed advantages of crossing this threshold. The wealthy don't just save their way to more wealth, they use their existing capital to acquire more capital-producing assets. When you have £20,000, banks see you as a potential risk. When you have $1 million in liquid investments, banks see you as a preferred customer they want to keep. The entire dynamic flips, and that access to better financing terms is worth tens of thousands of pounds over time.
Now, here's something that catches most new millionaires completely off guard, and nobody warns you about it. When you had $50,000 invested, losing 5% in a market downturn meant losing $2,500. Painful, but not devastating. When you have $1 million invested, that same 5% drop means losing $50,000 in a week. Think about that. You could lose more money in a single bad week than many people make in an entire year. I have watched people hit their first million and then become obsessed with checking their account balances multiple times per day, refreshing portfolio apps compulsively, watching their net worth swing by tens of thousands of dollars based on market movements completely beyond their control. It's like discovering that your financial future is tied to a roller coaster that never stops. The numbers are bigger now, and bigger numbers feel more real even when the percentage is identical.
This is why so many people who reach the $1 million threshold start shifting their investment strategies toward more conservative approaches. They begin prioritizing capital preservation over aggressive growth. The risk tolerance that got them to $1 million often isn't the same risk tolerance that helps them keep and grow it responsibly. Maybe you were perfectly comfortable having 80% of your $50,000 portfolio in growth stocks, but having $800,000 in highly volatile investments might keep you awake at night, even if the percentage allocation is identical. This shift toward preservation isn't just emotional, it's mathematically rational. A 20% loss when you have $50,000 sets you back $10,000. A 20% loss on $1 million sets you back $200,000 and potentially years of progress. You stop trying to hit home runs. You start trying to avoid striking out.
This security creates what I call the optionality mindset. Every major life decision becomes a choice between multiple viable options rather than a desperate attempt to avoid financial ruin. Do you want to live in an expensive city because you love the culture, or move somewhere cheaper to stretch your money further? Both become legitimate choices when your baseline financial needs are already covered. Do you want to start a business that might fail, or take a steady job that might be boring? When you have substantial invested capital, you can afford to bet on yourself in ways that would be mutless without that foundation. This optionality extends everywhere. Having children becomes less financially paralyzing. Supporting aging parents becomes more feasible. Taking time off for major life events doesn't threaten your long-term security. The foundation doesn't make decisions for you, but it makes almost all of them survivable.
Here's what's fascinating about human psychology and money, and it's genuinely counterintuitive. Despite these new anxieties about portfolio fluctuations and large daily swings, most people who cross the $1 million threshold report feeling fundamentally more secure than they ever have in their lives. Not because the money eliminates all uncertainty, but because it provides a foundation that feels substantial enough to weather most storms. When you know your investments could theoretically fund your lifestyle indefinitely, it changes how you think about every other risk in your life. Job security becomes less critical, health insurance gaps become less terrifying, economic recessions become less personally threatening. The foundation doesn't remove uncertainty from life, but it makes uncertainty survivable.
Here's where things get almost absurd. The $1 million threshold unlocks what I call the compound acceleration effect. If your $1 million grows by just 8% in a given year, you've generated $80,000 without any effort. That's more than many people contribute to their retirement accounts over multiple years of aggressive saving. This acceleration means your second million often comes dramatically faster than your first. The first million might take 15 to 20 years of disciplined saving and investing. But once you have that foundation, the combination of continued contributions and compound growth on a much larger base can cut that timeline in half or better. The first million is the hardest. Every million after it is easier than the one before, not because you're working harder, but because the math is finally working with you at full force.
Here's something that most people don't think about until the numbers get large enough to force them to. The wealthy don't just have more money, they have completely different incentives to optimize their finances. When your investment gains are generating $70,000 in annual income, the difference between paying 15% versus 25% in taxes becomes enormous. We're talking about $7,000 per year, every single year, just from being in the right tax bracket or using the right accounts. Tax loss harvesting, asset location strategies, retirement account optimization, these strategies become worth the time and complexity because the dollar amounts involved make the effort genuinely worthwhile. At $10,000 invested, optimizing taxes might save you $200 a year. At $1 million invested, it might save you $10,000 or more annually. This is why wealthy people pay accountants and financial advisors, not because they're wasteful, because the math justifies it.
Private banking relationships, dedicated financial advisors, and sophisticated tax planning services all become economically viable when you have substantial assets to manage. These services aren't necessarily better because they're expensive. They're better because they're designed for people whose financial situations have become complex enough to genuinely benefit from specialized expertise. When you have $5,000 invested, a financial advisor who charges 1% annually costs you $50 a year, but might add marginal value. When you have $1 million invested, that same 1% fee costs $10,000 per year, but the advisor might legitimately save you $30,000 through better tax strategy, better asset allocation, and better access to opportunities. Scale changes the math on every financial service and relationship you have. The system is literally designed to reward people who have already accumulated capital. Understanding this isn't cynical, it's just accurate.
Here's one of the most powerful and least discussed advantages of crossing this threshold. When you have $20,000, banks see you as a potential risk. When you have $1 million in liquid investments, banks start seeing you as a preferred customer. Suddenly, you qualify for investment property loans with better terms. You can get business lines of credit based on your asset base. You have access to margin lending that lets you borrow against your portfolio for opportunities without actually selling your investments. This access to cheap capital is how the wealthy really compound their advantages. They don't just save their way to more wealth, they use their existing capital to acquire more capital-producing assets. It's like having a key that unlocks doors most people don't even know exist. Real estate becomes a completely different game. Instead of scraping together a down payment, you can move quickly on opportunities, make cash offers, and access bridge financing simply not available to people without a substantial asset base. When you're accumulating your first $100,000, every dollar feels precious because progress is slow and invisible. You celebrate hitting new milestones because they represent months or years of discipline. But when you have $1 million generating $70,000 annually, you start thinking about money in completely different units. A $10,000 expense isn't devastating anymore because you know your investments will replace that money in under 2 months. This creates financial breathing room, where short-term setbacks don't trigger the same anxiety spiral they used to. Your car needs a major repair? You handle it. The HVAC dies in August? Annoying, but not catastrophic. A medical bill arrives unexpectedly? You pay it and move on. The problems don't disappear, but they stop having the power to derail your entire financial trajectory. That's a fundamentally different way to live. Perhaps the most profound change that happens when you cross the $1 million threshold is how you think about legacy. When you're building your first $100,000, you're focused entirely on your own financial security. Every decision is about protecting and growing what you have. But when you have $1 million invested and it's growing faster than you can spend it, you start thinking about what happens to this wealth beyond your own lifetime. This isn't just about leaving money to children or charities. It's about understanding that you've created something that can outlive you, something that can continue generating value for decades or even generations. Your investments become less about funding your own lifestyle and more about stewarding capital that could impact multiple lives over extended periods. This shift in perspective is one of the quietest and most significant changes that happens when you reach this milestone. The game expands. Here's something nobody warns you about, and it's genuinely weird to experience. The more money you have invested, the more complicated money conversations become. You can't really complain about investment volatility when your daily portfolio swings exceed most people's monthly salaries. You can't discuss the stress of market downturns when you know your lifestyle isn't actually threatened. You certainly can't talk about the burden of managing substantial wealth when most people around you are still struggling to save anything. This creates an unexpected form of social isolation. The financial concerns that dominate most conversations become irrelevant to your situation, and your actual financial concerns sound like luxury problems to people still building their first $100,000. Most new millionaires aren't prepared for this. They reach a milestone they've been working toward for years and find that it changes not just their finances, but some of their most fundamental social dynamics.
So let's talk about what it actually takes to get here, because understanding the destination is only useful if you understand the path. The math is straightforward, even if the discipline isn't. If you invest $1,000 per month starting at 25 years old, earning an average 8% annual return, you'll reach $1 million by your mid-40s. That's roughly 18 to 20 years of consistent, disciplined investing. If you can invest $1,500 per month, maybe through income growth and lifestyle optimization, you can shave that down to around 15 years. If you start earlier, you benefit from more time for compound interest to work. The uncomfortable truth is that there are no shortcuts to the first million for most people. What there is a reliable process. Consistent contributions, time in the market, not panicking during downturns, and avoiding the lifestyle inflation that derails most people in their high-earning years.
The single biggest threat to reaching the $1 million threshold isn't a bad stock market or low income. It's lifestyle inflation, the slow, invisible process where every raise you get gets absorbed by a bigger apartment, a newer car, or more expensive habits. The people who actually reach $1 million invested are almost always people who learned to separate their standard of living from their income growth. When they got a $10,000 raise, they didn't automatically increase their spending by $10,000. They increased their investments by $10,000. This sounds simple. It is genuinely hard, because every raise comes with social pressure to upgrade your life to match. Every milestone comes with the feeling that you've earned the right to enjoy it more. Managing that impulse, not eliminating it entirely, but managing it, is what separates the people who reach this threshold from the people who spend their whole career making good money and never building wealth.
The vehicle that gets most people to $1 million invested is genuinely boring. It's not crypto, it's not stock picking, it's not some sophisticated multi-asset strategy that requires a finance degree to understand. For the vast majority of people who reach this milestone, the vehicle is low-cost index funds, broad market exposure, minimal fees, and the discipline to stay invested through downturns. The S&P 500 has returned roughly 10% annually on average over the past 100 years, including all the crashes, all the recessions, all the wars, and all the panics. The people who stayed invested through all of it ended up wealthy. The people who tried to be clever, timing the market or chasing hot sectors, mostly underperformed. The boring path is the reliable path, and reliability is exactly what compound interest rewards over 15 to 20 years.
Here's something that every financial expert knows, but not enough people talk about honestly. The math of building wealth is simple. The psychology of building wealth is extraordinarily difficult. Your brain is not wired for long-term investing. It's wired for short-term survival. When markets drop 30%, your brain screams, "Sell everything!" even though the rational strategy is to hold or buy more. When markets are going up and everyone is excited, your brain says, "Buy more!" even though valuations are stretched and risk is elevated. The investor who stays invested through the 2008 financial crisis, through COVID in 2020, through every major correction, that investor ends up wealthy. The investor who panics and sells at the bottom, then waits until the market has fully recovered to buy back in, that investor locks in losses and misses the recovery. Reaching $1 million invested isn't just about having the right strategy. It's about having the psychological discipline to stick to the strategy when every instinct is telling you to abandon it.
All right, let's make this practical. Because understanding the destination is useless without knowing the first steps. Step 1, if your employer offers a 401k match, contribute enough to get the full match immediately. That's a guaranteed 50% to 100% return on your money before the market does anything. There is no investment on earth that beats a guaranteed employer match. Step 2, open a Roth IRA if you're eligible. You contribute after-tax dollars now, and every dollar of growth, potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars, comes out completely tax-free in retirement. That tax-free compounding is one of the most powerful wealth-building tools available to regular people. Step 3, automate your investments to happen on payday, before you see the money. The single biggest variable in whether people reach $1 million is whether they invest consistently, and automation removes the decision from the equation. Step 4, do not touch it. Every time you pull money out early, you reset the compound clock. Stay in, stay consistent, let time do its job.
Here's what I want you to take away from everything we've covered today. The $1 million threshold isn't just about reaching a number, it's about crossing into a fundamentally different financial reality. You transform from someone who trades time for money into someone whose money works harder than most people do at their jobs. Your relationship with risk changes. Your relationship with work changes. Your relationship with time changes. Opportunities that were completely inaccessible become reachable. The very infrastructure of the financial system starts working for you instead of against you. And perhaps most importantly, the security that comes from having substantial invested capital changes how you make every other decision in your life, not just financial decisions, career decisions, family decisions, the risks you're willing to take, the things you're willing to walk away from. If you're currently building toward that first million, I hope this video gave you a clearer picture of what you're actually building toward. It is worth every year of discipline. It is worth every delayed purchase and every automated transfer. The game genuinely changes on the other side.
If this gave you a new way to think about what you're actually building toward, hit that like button and subscribe. Every week I break down the real math and psychology behind wealth decisions that most people figure out too late. Next video, we're going deep into car payments, specifically how people are affording $900 a month car payments and what it's actually costing them over their lifetimes. The numbers are genuinely horrifying. I'll see you there.